Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. So I'm creating this video kind of as a crash course to climbing, especially in Elo's Master and Below for Season 14. So you guys might remember I made a video last year on how I hit Chandra's 75% win rate. I'll link this in the description if you want to watch it, kind of talking about what I thought was important for climbing. So this season, I don't think it's super different, but I will still talk about just the things I think have changed and also, again, what I think is important right now. So you can see currently my account is 240 LP Master with a 75% win rate on career. I hit Master with a 76% win rate, and actually yesterday I got it all the way up to 78, if you can see there, because I went on a giant win streak. But yeah, I will still focus this mainly on talking about the lower elos. So the first thing I want to talk about is all the pre-games. So the pre-game I think is probably the least important thing on this list, but it still can go a pretty long way. I will say that for most of you, the thing you should be thinking about in the pregame is just your comfort, right? If you can play champions you're comfortable on, that's going to be the best thing. That being said, if you're trying to build a champ pool for solo queue or you're choosing from a selection of champions already, there are some things you can think about in pregame which are kind of nice. So when I'm thinking in the pregame, right, I'm thinking about a variety of win conditions. And I'll read them out because I wrote them down. So there's a few. There's you can win the game by winning lane, right, and getting priority in order to, just like kind of snowball from there, right? You can get plays, you can get solo kills, you can invade the jungle, stuff like that. You can also kind of skirmish or roam. That's a win condition, right? So you might have champions that are very good at laning, such as Victor, but not very good at skirmishing. Whereas there are some champs like Katarina, for example, that are not very good at laning, but are very good at skirmishing, right? So that's a different win condition you can have. There's also mobility as a win condition. The reason I put that down is because a lot of games are lost because you don't have mobility, right? So there are some games where there's just too much threat onto you, and through not having mobility, you can actually just end up losing. So rather than it being like a strict win condition, I think it can be, I suppose it's like a compositional counter, like if they do have lots of engage, having something with mobility is very nice. There's also just the kind of farm win condition, and the reason I mention that is because there are some matchups that are kind of even throughout the game, but one champion might farm way quicker than the others. So an example would be, let's say you're playing something like LeBlanc, right? Like LeBlanc is not very good at farming. You can see my CS is pretty low here. Part of that's because I played LeBlanc support, but in general, LeBlanc's not that great at farming, right? So if LeBlanc has an even matchup against something, but that other champ farms quicker, like that champ can end up farming and kind of outscaling, even though they might not outscale in terms of like power. Like if they're both 6 items, they might be similar, but you can just reach those items quicker. So the ability to farm is also a win con. And the last thing is just outscaling. So some champs just scale better than others, right? And the reason I mention these win cons is because I like to have as many of those as possible. So when I'm blind picking, for example, you can pick a champion probably that doesn't have all of them, but has a lot of them. So an example right now would be Tristana. Now, obviously, you could look at this and be like, okay, yeah, like Tristana is really OP. And that is true, but I will talk about some of the more meta-resistant ones as well. So Tristana is a great example of this because Tristana has a very strong laning phase. She has mobility. She is very good at skirmishing. She scales and farms well, right? So that is a champion that even when blind picking, you kind of have all the win cons. And I will make a blind pick tier list at some point because I know it's something I get asked a lot. But I think a lot of the time you guys can kind of limit your options a lot by blinding something kind of bad. So like, for example, let's take Cassio. Like for me, Cassio is like mainly a counterpick champ. If you blind Cassio, you still have some win cons, right? You can outscale, you can farm probably, you can skirmish, but the mobility and the laning phase, like you will lose lane to longer range champions. And your mobility is very weak if they end up playing, something that can kind of gank you. So that's why Cassio might not be a great blind, is because, she doesn't satisfy a lot of those win conditions when blinded, but she does when counterpicking. So again, to kind of bring that all back, what you should be doing, if you have the ability to choose from multiple champs, you should try blind a champion that has as many of those win cons as possible. And again, champs that tend to be good blinds are stuff like Orianna is quite good, Ari, obviously just OP champs right now like Tristana, champs like Azir, Syndra are quite good. Even some kind of like more off meta champions, like you can blind something like Garen, and like, it actually has a lot of those win cons as a blind pick, especially because people don't know what to pick into it. So I'll probably make a longer video on this at some point, just like blind picks in general. But I think blind picking is one of the most important things for pregame. So try and pick a champ that, has multiple win conditions and ideally has some form of mobility or safety. I think that's the most important thing to think about for the pregame. A couple other minor tips I have is just in general, try to be very specific with your picks. So like, for example, I know that I want to play Cassio into like kind of shorter range comps, into specific matchups. Maybe I want to play like Orianna when I have like a carry jungle into like a mage matchup or something like that. I think if you do have a champion pool, then getting more specific about when you're going to pick the champs is better. Like I said, though, for most people, comfort is going to be really important. The last thing is off-rolling. So I didn't talk about this much in my last video, I didn't think, but I think off-rolling is actually really important, I've noticed. And the reason for that is because if you're good at your off-roll, I actually think it's easier to win off-roll than it is to win main roll. And the reason for that is because your teammates are going to be on-rolled. So I think, like, for me, at the moment, when I'm off-rolled, I play, like, Lulu, Hui, or LeBlanc as support. And if I get off-rolled top, because I'm queuing mid-top, I just play Cassio top. So I think you don't need to have like a champ pool in your other roles. You literally just need to be able to play one champ, and it can even be like a mid lane champ. Like I said, there's mid lane support options if you want, or mid lane top options. You can even play mages bot or whatever. But I think having a really good champ for your off role that you're really good at is very important. Because I used to have the mindset of like, okay, if I just go 50% win rate in my off role, I will just end up climbing for my main role. But I actually found that it's easier to win off roll. I genuinely think that because you just have better teammates, right? Like your teammates are going to be more consistently on rolled. So I think it's really, really important that you have, just one champ in your off roll that's super solid, and you can honestly farm a lot of LP just from playing your off roll. The next thing I want to talk about that's really important for climbing is the laning phase. So this game here is a game I played yesterday against a Korean challenger mid Tristana. And I want to show this as an example because I want to show you, I guess, that these laning fundamentals apply at a very high level as well. So obviously this is talked about more in my specific laning guides, but like I said, I want to give you kind of the crash course, guide to it. So the 4 things that are really important for lane, I've got them written, it's wave control, cooldowns, abusing advantages, and vision. It all comes down to kind of those things. So the first thing is wave control. So in any matchup, you kind of want to decide at all times, I guess, like, do you want to be pushing or pulling? So generally, pushing allows you to build an advantage, right? If you are the one that's pushing, you get creep advantage, which means you have better trades. You get level advantage, like you can trade 2 to 1 or 3 to 2. You get control over the lane in the sense that like you can, move up aggressively and your opponent has to move back and stuff like that. At the same time, like if you're on the losing side, like I am here, at least in the early game, you kind of have to let the wave come to you, right? Because you don't want to be far out in the lane, able to get ganked, able to get chased down the lane and all that sort of stuff. So the wave control is very, very important. I guess if you want like kind of I would recommend watching my wave control guide. You'll find it on my channel. But if you want kind of the TLDR, normally it's you push to create an advantage and you freeze to extend that advantage, because once you do build an advantage, having the wave kind of like frozen on your side allows you to get a kill. It is also worth noting that like freezing can be detrimental in the sense that like if you do freeze while you're ahead, it does mean that you can't like you can't roam, for example, you can't get good wards. So it's not always good to freeze, but normally you want to push until you build some sort of lead over your opponent, and once you do, then you want to start freezing after that. That's like a good rule to follow. You can also freeze just for safety, like I said, like if you're losing or you don't have flash or you're really scared of getting ganked or anything like that, it can be a good time to freeze. Next thing is cooldowns. So whenever I'm like coaching or anything, cooldowns is something that comes up all the time. So some champions have very long cooldowns, some champions have very short, some kind of don't have any, champs like Yasuo. But generally, cooldowns are really, really important and something that I abuse like every game. So cooldowns is about 2 things. One, it's about punishing your opponent's cooldowns. So that's knowing which ones are important and how long they are. So for example, Trist W is like a pretty long cooldown and it's quite important, right? When she doesn't have it, she can't play aggro. Same thing here. If Trist uses E on the wave, that means I can either force a trade or I can commit my cooldowns on the wave as well. It's really important that you respect your own cooldowns being down. So like right here, if we go back a little bit, I never would have committed all my cooldowns to the wave until Tristana had used hers, because I know if I use mine without her using hers, she can easily jump on me, right? So cooldowns, again, it comes up like every time I coach someone, all about respecting your own being down and punishing your opponents when they use theirs. That's like very, very important. Something else you can do is you can try and like bait out or force out your opponent's cooldown. So the way you can do that is like if you walk up aggressively and kind of like look to force trades or look to harass your opponent whenever they go for a CS, that can force them to use a cooldown in order to get that CS without taking damage, right? So cooldowns, again, just very big component of mid. The next one that's really important for lane is abusing advantages. So I've skipped through a bit later in the game where I've ended up with a little bit of a gold advantage over my opponent. So you might not be able to see it that clearly here, but I have Chapter Tier Darkseal, and she only has like Vamp Scepter and some components. So basically, I have the advantage here of I have a gold advantage, I have an item advantage. There's a lot of different advantages you can have mid. You could have level advantage, you could have creep advantage, cooldowns, sums, gold spent, like I meant, or like I said. So there's a variety of different advantages you could have, and you want to try find a way to punish that, which generally is going to mean forcing trades. So if you're stronger than your opponent, like I am here, I really, really want to try and trade with her as often as possible, because I know if we trade back and forth, that I'm going to end up coming out on top. And this is something that I notice a lot, again, when I'm coaching people, is that they either really struggle to abuse their advantages, like their opponent might use cooldowns in front of them and they don't abuse it, or they might recall, after they've got a successful solo kill or whatever, and they have this sizable advantage, and then they don't actually end up doing anything. Right? So you can look to force trades, you can look to deny CS, you can look to force a solo kill or something, which I think is what happens here. So you can kind of see, right, like I'm quite happy to trade back and forth, just because she does not deal as much damage as I do, right? And even though she has the sustain, just in terms of pure trades, I'm a lot stronger, right? And so especially in little situations like here, right, like level 8 versus level 7, with this huge item advantage, with a huge health advantage, you really, really, really want to force fights here, right? And so what you can do is you can just stand between them and their creeps. You can try and make it so that they can't actually, walk up to the creep wave at all. So you can see that I end up getting a solo kill here, and that's kind of like, a lot of the time when I'm coaching someone, I will see, they have like a 10 CS lead or whatever. And 10 CS lead is nice, but it doesn't actually like impact the game a whole lot. But things like solo kills or plates or, finding plays in the river or whatever, that's all the kind of like slam dunks, that takes the game home. And so here I've finally capitalized on all my minor advantages, right? Like my gold lead, my small item lead and stuff, to actually create a big advantage, right? I get a kill, I deny a lot of CS, I take a plate, and now I'm like incredibly far ahead, right? So that's kind of what you're looking for in the lane to really like end up exploding it, is you're using all your laning techniques, like I kind of talked about before, your wave control and your cooldown punishment, to finally build that advantage, and then you punish the advantage in order to get the big win. The last thing I really quickly want to talk about for lane is vision. I have a whole video on vision, but I'm just going to kind of give you a TLDR. Again, you can watch the video if you want the explanations, but basically there's a few things to think about for vision in the early game. Mostly it depends on where the enemy jungler starts. So if the enemy jungler starts bot side, typically you want to ward top side, and you just hug to that. So you ward top side around 230. There's no way the jungler can gank you from bot because you'll be hugging top, and by the time they get to top, your vision will spot them. Now, if you don't know where the enemy jungler started, it's generally a good idea just to ward to wherever your jungler is pathing to. That way you've got extra safety on that side. So if your jungler is walking bot, or your jungler starts top and is pathing bot, you can just ward bot knowing that, like, you can hug to your jungler on that side. So it's typically good to ward at like 2 minutes 30 and 4 minutes. Those are normally the good ward timers. It can be a little earlier against like champs that can gank a bit earlier or stuff like that. I don't want to go too in depth into this because, again, it's like all covered in my warding guide, but I think this will normally go a pretty long way. So basically the checklist for this is just check where the enemy jungler started at level 1, ward on the opposite side of the map at 2 minutes 30 and hug to that. Then ward on the original side of the map at 4 minutes and hug to that. And that'll keep you safe most of the time. Because that'll mean that, your jungler, he clears his top camps, he resets, he comes back bot, and your vision will spot it. So that should keep you safe from most early ganks. After that, pretty much you just set up like a pink and a ward on one side. Doesn't really matter which. So you could like pink this bush and then ward up here. And then as long as you have this sort of vision set up, or like, this sort of vision set up, that should keep you safe from any ganks as long as you hug to that. And this is very important because any deaths to the enemy jungler or to the enemy support in the early game do hurt a lot. But yeah, that should keep you safe most of the time. Again, if you want a deeper explanation, check out my warding guide. I'll link it in the description. But that is kind of the TLDR. Keeping up your farm is also incredibly important for solo queue. So I'm going to skim through this replay that I have here and just talk about kind of like what the mistakes normally are when people end up, falling behind in farm, or kind of just like the main things to think about in order to keep your CS high, especially in the chaos of solo queue. Because it's one thing to CS, when nothing's happening, but CSing, when there's a bunch of fights and stuff going on, is a lot harder. So my kind of list, or I guess my important things for farming well, is one is going to be not dropping waves randomly. So I'll kind of show you that throughout this VOD. What that means is that like you need to most of the time shove your wave before making a play, right? That can mean shoving mid wave, it can mean shoving a side wave. Pretty much you always want to be, farming and pushing a wave and then making the play, because obviously that means you get the CS, but it also means that your opponent can come to it a lot of the time, which is quite important. Another thing is TP usage. So I'll show you some examples of that in this game, but TP usage, especially in the side lane, is really, really important. And a lot of you guys misuse TP, and that causes you to fall incredibly far behind in CS. Something I'll talk about and maybe show you guys a bit more is that TP gives you permission to side lane. So if you waste your TP in the mid game, what can happen is that you can't actually farm side lane. And that's normally when people fall very far behind. Obviously, sometimes you do need to TP to fights, but that's a big one. There's also base timings. So I do have a whole video on base timings, and actually have a whole video on farming in general. So again, if you want to know more about it, I would check those out. But base timings, like, it's really, really important you try and find a base where you won't lose anything. So, if you can base when you have TP up and you can TP back on the map, or if you can base after having shoved a wave or something like that. That's really important, because a lot of the time it's about actually just being there for the wave as opposed to like actually CSing the wave. You know what I mean? A lot of you guys don't actually have problems last hitting, but you just have problems being on waves. Like, you give up waves for free because you're roaming or you're basing at bad times or whatever. Another component, I guess, to the side lane is the side lane vision. So I'll skim through that in a moment and just show you what I mean. And finally, I think for side lane, playing around the jungler is really important. So a lot of you guys end up getting kind of lost, on the side lane. You've really got to play around your junglers. So what I'm going to do is just kind of skim through this. So most of this early game is just me laning mid, right? Like, my CS is quite high because I haven't given up any waves randomly. I just, whenever I make a play, I push my wave first and then I enter the river if there is going to be a play, right? You can see as an example here. We're going to fight this Rift Herald fight. You can see Vi is going to contest it. I'm happy to walk to this because I've already pushed the mid wave, which means I'm not going to lose any CS in the meantime. To become and kill Vi, and then I can come back mid and CS the wave. You can also see the base timing element, because I know I'm not going to lose any creeps here, because as you can see, I'm basing having pushed the wave. So even in this like little sequence here, you can see like this is the importance of good base timers. It's also the importance of pushing mid first. So come back on the map, manage to farm up all this. Super, super good. I guess worth noting is that deaths will contribute to having low CS. Like, if you do die a lot, I will talk about deaths in the next section and kind of how to avoid them in general, but that is obviously an element. So again, just pushing, and then I can make my play, right? If I want to do anything, I can ward. I always push first. That's very, very crucial. So I think that's mostly for the early game, but let's go to the mid game, because I think that's, for a lot of you guys, you can CS fairly well for the early game, but then once mid game rolls around, you find it very difficult. So in the mid game, the mid laner's job is normally to go to the side lane, and ideally you push the wave in as far as you can. So, if you can get it all the way into the enemy tower, that's like the gold standard. Now, that might not be possible depending on your side lane vision and depending on where your jungler and stuff is. So in this situation, I think so I end up going top, right? Here, if you take a look at the map right now. So we see Vi bot side, and I have Jarvan top side. What that means is that I am strong side. I have people on my side. I am allowed to push this wave as far as I am able to, even if I don't have the best vision, because I know that my jungler is here and theirs isn't. So what that means, okay, I start pushing side. You can also see that I have TP available. What that means is that if a fight happens elsewhere, I can TP to it. But ideally, I try and hold my TP. That's what I'm trying to do. Trying to hold my TP and just create pressure with it. And I was thinking about TPing bot, but because there was so many people there, I decided not to. And in the meantime, I just shut top, right? I get all this gold. Because I know that Vi is still bot, even though my jungler has gone bot, I know no one can be here, so I continue to shove. What I could do here is I could walk mid. So in the same way that when you play mid, before you make a play, you shove the wave, if you want, you could rotate mid here. But this tower looks free, so I'm going to hit it. So basically, what I'm just trying to show you is like what you're kind of thinking about on the side lane. You're pretty much just thinking about, do I have TP, yes or no? Do I have good vision? Yes or no? And think about like where their jungler is and where your jungler is. You can also look to take jungle camps if you want. So I could have looked at these Krugs here. I did notice that there was a fight starting bot, and so I decided to TP, right? This ends up being quite a good fight. But what do I need to be careful of now? What this means is that for the next 4 or 3.5 minutes, it's a lot harder for me to side lane because I don't have TP. You can still go to side lane to catch a wave, right? Like, if this top wave were closer, I would still go and farm it. But because the top wave is so far away, I can't really walk to it. On top of that, Dragon is spawning soon, so I want to be there. And Jarvan is bot side and Vi is top, so it's really scary for me to go here. So instead, what do? I just come and hover around mid. Ideally, you don't share gold with Kai'Sa, but I just kind of hover for a bit and I wait for the side lane to be in a closer position. So you can see that this side wave bot is actually pushed out, and now I can come and farm this and also look for this Talia kill. She ends up getting out. Yeah, basically, oh, she did die. We come bot, I again push the wave. This time Vi's gone top, and I will push in as far as I can. Now, obviously, not every game will you have the jungler on your side. It might be on the other way. So when that happens, you just kind of clear the wave, under your bot tower. So that was probably a lot of information in quite a short amount of time. The main things just to remember are pretty much don't give up waves randomly. Make sure you're basing at a time where you're not really going to lose anything. And then when you get into the mid game, shove the wave in as far as you can without dying while thinking about like the vision and the jungler. Again, if you want more explanation, you can either watch one of these videos, there's you can go on the live channel or live section and watch this, or I have a whole guide on mid lane or on mid game. I have a whole guide on side laning. I have a whole guide on farming in general. So there's plenty more content if you want deeper explanation. The final thing I really want to talk about for helping you guys climb out of those lower elos is lowering your deaths, right? Kind of goes without saying. I think the mantra of high CS, low deaths has kind of always been true for League of Legends, but I think it's especially true at the moment because snowballing is very out of control. Like, you snowball in this game extremely quickly. So if you're making lots of unforced errors, typically deaths, that is it's gonna catapult the game out of your control pretty quickly. So I made a list of things that I think commonly cause deaths. These are based off, my deaths, but also, again, when I'm coaching people and kind of what I notice are a common deaths. So by far, top of the list, 2 aggro with no flash. So in League, if you're playing a champ without mobility, you have to be very careful when you don't have flash. Especially if they have like lots of tools to punish. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you just sit under your tower for 5 minutes, but it means, okay, like play a little safer. It means like be careful if you have no vision, be careful if you're low on health or whatever. And it's also a big reason why playing champs with mobility in solo queue is a lot easier, because you don't actually have to play as safe when you lose your flash. Something, or I guess like a way I like to think about it, is that you kind of have 2 chances to make a mistake, right? You have the first thing, which is like the first instance, which is you lost your flash. So that could have been avoided, right? Maybe you're playing too aggro, or, whatever, for whatever reason you lost your flash. But you have the second chance of, well, now we need to play a little bit safer without flash. Now, even if you don't die, you have still lost something, right? You've lost the ability to pressure, which is still bad, but you haven't died. You haven't actually given over the goal. So that's definitely probably number 1, is just if you have flash, make sure you play like a little safer for the next 5 or so minutes until you get your flashback. Second one is not playing around your vision or your team. So something that I notice a lot is people either disrespecting where their teammates are or disrespecting their lack of vision. So this definitely happens a lot in the mid game. I will see people try and force fights when their teammates are in base or something. So like, if your jungler is bot side and you're fighting top side, that's generally bad, right? Or if your support just recalled and you guys are looking for a fight mid, that's pretty troll, right? It's really important that you're just staring at your teammates, especially in mid game. Like, if I just skip ahead here to like the mid game, you really want to at all times be just like staring at your teammates and being like, okay, like, where are they? What are they doing? So like, if we took this as an example, right? Echo is currently recalling, which means that like we probably don't want to look for any fights. Now Rakan is recalling as well, right? So I can do stuff bot side if I know the enemy team is top, but here I don't think I do, right? I only see Aatrox, so I decide to reset. Although now I see Kindred, so I decide to pressure, right? So in the mid game, you're mostly just going to spend it staring at your minimap, looking, okay, where are my teammates? Where are their teammates? And kind of, making sure you play around that. Another one that happens a lot is just poor hugging. So if I go back to the early game, it's something I talked about a lot. But it's really important that pretty much at all times you're hugging to one side of the lane rather than playing in the middle. So you want to kind of identify which side of the lane is safe, whether that's bot side or top side. Because something that happens a lot is that people have this idea that like the turret is your safety, right? So when they get ganked, a lot of the time they run back to the turret. But normally you actually want to run into the river, depending on which side of the river is safe. So if you have vision bot, you would probably run away to bot. If you get ganked from, I don't know, the bot side, then maybe you'd run away to top. Just because the turret is normally too far away to actually reach, depending on where you're positioned. So yeah, making sure you hug to one of those sides, typically the side that is safe, is really, really important. And just like have it in the back of your mind that like you want to run to that safety of the river as opposed to the safety of the tower most of the time, because it'll be difficult for them to chase in a fog of war, and because like you have vision there, you know that the enemy can't be there most of the time. Other things I noticed, poor itemization is one. So this is, I'm going to make an AP itemization guide probably in the next couple days. And so that'll probably help you guys a lot. But one, I guess, thing I see a lot is like not buying Merc Treads against teams that have a lot of CC, or not buying like a defensive, like a Banshee or Zonya against teams that are very heavy on one damage type. So if you notice a team is like double or triple AP, that's a really good game to go for a Banshees or Mercs. Yeah, again, same thing if the enemy team is heavy on AD, good Zonya's game. It's also worth itemizing against unavoidable damage, especially like if you're against, say, Arthas or Vi, that's like a really good game to buy defensive because you cannot realistically avoid that damage. So there are a lot of deaths to bad itemization. Hopefully my guide soon will fix that. The only other one that I really have on my list is respecting threats. So when you come to team fights, right, it's really, really important that you kind of identify like what are the specific abilities that you're scared of. So examples could be like maybe you're really scared of like, I don't know, Vi ult or Blitzcrank hook or, you know, Nautilus ult or something. And it's really important that you consider that and you think, okay, how do I play around that? Do I wait for it to be used? Is there some sort of like positioning I can do? I think just being really aware of like what the threats are and being able to avoid that is super, super important. Because even, you know, even I have deaths just to disrespecting, you know, key abilities. So in this game, it might be like Maokai W and Maokai ult. Those are probably the big ones. So I need to just make sure that I either position far enough away and wait for Maokai to use W, or that I have kind of some wall or something I can jump over when Maokai starts looking at me. That's very, very important. So basically, the team fight threats, a lot of you guys have kind of random deaths to that pretty much every game. And the last thing I did want to mention for deaths is sometimes you will die just to being too weak. And what I mean by that is like I said, this game is very snowballing. So if you fall behind, you're going to have a very hard time living, right? Like a lot of the time you will end up dying just because your opponents are too strong. So, you know, there is not much you can do about that other than just like try play safe and farm your way back into the game. But sometimes you should realize that there actually just isn't much you can do and you're just too far behind, you know? So it is really important to have like that stable early game to avoid deaths in the first place, because, you know, once you're at your 10th death, there isn't much you can do to avoid your 11th death because people are just going to be too fed and you're going to be too far behind. So I think that's pretty much going to be it for this video. Like I said, I just kind of wanted to make a crash course, kind of like TLDR video for what I think is very important for climbing this season. I have, you know, fundamental guides on basically everything I've talked about in this video, so there's plenty of things you can look at. I guess to just summarize everything, the main things are just like, yeah, high CS, low deaths, and make sure you have a stable early game. And that, you know, again, the important things within that I've talked about throughout this video. If you have any questions about anything, you can either comment below and I will be happy to reply to you. You can come to my Twitch stream and ask me questions on twitch.tv/ShokLol. I would make sure to check out all the fundamental videos that I have on my channel, and also check out some of the like unranked master or road to rank 1 videos where I kind of talk about putting this into practice. So hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. It was definitely a bit less structured than the last one I did, but I think the content was still very, very useful. If you did like the video, go ahead and like and subscribe. I will try and make some more up-to-date, you know, fundamental and champion guides soon. But yeah, otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next